Stefania, if you would like to start.
Good afternoon from Paris, and welcome to all those joining us from across the globe for this third International Day of Education, co-organized with the Global Partnership for Education, UN Headquarters, and the Learning Planet Festival. And thank you very much, all of you being in this virtual room today, united in our passion for education. Well, it's a special kind of International Day today. We know we are here to celebrate and alert. Celebrating the commitment, partnerships, creativity we've witnessed throughout this global disruption to keep learning going on in some of the harshest circumstances, the ever disruption in education we saw last year since the beginning of the pandemic. But we are also here to alert and raise the red flag. Education is under threat. Globally, over the past year, schools have been closed everywhere. 2/3 of the student population are still affected today by full or partial closures. It's about 800 million, according to UNESCO data. And the longer these last, the higher the risk of learning losses, disengagement, and isolation. Then we need a serious recovery package for the COVID-19 generation. So today we celebrate and learn from the many that have charted a way forward. Young leaders, innovators, business entrepreneurs, prize-winning teachers, education advocates, top-level representatives from the UN, multilateral partners, and more. Interpretation is available in 6 languages. Our agenda is very tight, so let's get started immediately. I now have the pleasure to hand over to our Director General, Audrey Azoulay, to share opening words with you.
Monsieur le Secrétaire Général des Nations Unies, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, dear pupils, dear students, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you here on this third day, International Day of Education. The year just gone has indeed been exceptional. It's the first time that education was at risk across the world. Our societies became aware altogether that education is indeed a common good, that schools are more than a place of learning, that they are indeed a vital place for life, for mental health, for physical health, for feeding, nourishing, and education. Now, as the pandemic is still around, vaccination is not protecting us. Today, half the students across the world are still affected by total or partial closure of schools or universities. Over the whole crisis, UNESCO maintained a running count of all this and launched a number of concrete practical actions. There is an urgent need to do something, seeing as 24 million learners may never go back to school. Mainly girls, incidentally, which is why we've launched this great campaign of Girls Back to School and prepared a handbook for best practices with WHO so that we can reopen and keep running schools. What is at stake is the future of our children and societies. To do together, we can focus on what happened in October last year during the Global Meeting for Education. At that meeting, our partners and more than 70 heads of states, governments, and ministers made significant pledges having been invited to do so by UNESCO. We therefore now have a roadmap to reopen schools safely, where that is possible, to strengthen the skills and training of teachers and learners and bridge the digital gap, which has deprived 470 million students of remote education. We have the resources, we know the path, and we can also rely on the levers that have been rolled out over the year. First of all, the Global Coalition for Education, launched by UNESCO. It includes 160 partners, supports the continued learning and the return to school of 400 million pupils and students and 12 million teachers in 70 countries. We know that we can rely on the courage, the energy of all these discrete heroes of education, teachers, students, families, and other stakeholders we will hear this afternoon. They preserved this right to education.
In the months to come, we must all take action together for education, and we suggest three main ways. Firstly, we must protect the educational community, pupils and families. This is the goal of the vaccination campaigns, and I call once again for teachers to be considered as priority groups. The continuity of learning depends on it. Secondly, we must improve education financing at a time when the crisis could drive low and medium income countries to cut education budgets by $200 billion a year, which means 40% of the sum we need to invest annually to achieve education for all by 2030. In line with the commitments made by the countries at the Global Education Meeting, we must make education a priority in recovery plans and maintain or increase education budgets. This also means increasing international aid for education and ensuring resources to be allocated more fairly. On this last point, much remains to be done, as our most recent reports show. Around the world, 4 in 5 countries finance education without taking into account local disparities, when they should send more funds to where they are needed most. And lastly, we need to reimagine education. Because even before COVID-19, we had not achieved quality education for all, with 258 million children and young people out of school. Also because we need to take better account of the issues of tomorrow into education: climate change education, global citizenship education, media literacy, digital skills. We also need to review the importance of distance learning in order to face future crises. That's why UNESCO is currently organizing a global conversation on the futures of education. And we will publish our report later this year, following this global consultation of nearly 1 million education actors. Our only choice for the future is to work together, as we are doing now for this International Day, alongside the Global Partnership for Education and the Interdisciplinary Research Center, led by François Tadei, whom I thank. But working among adults will not be enough. We also need to ensure that young people play their rightful role in this debate. One of the 9 ideas for public action produced by our International Commission on the Futures of Education is precisely to involve more learners in building these changes. Ladies and gentlemen, dear pupils, education is our greatest treasure. Sacrificing it means renouncing all hope for the future and progress. Let's build together and renew our common world, in the words of the philosopher Hannah Arendt. And with her words, I conclude and wish you all an excellent International Day.
Thank you very much, Director General. Let's hear a special message for the International Day from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
When education is interrupted, it affects everyone, and especially students, teachers, and families. Today, on the 3rd International Day of Education, I pay tribute to their resilience in the face of a pandemic that, at its peak, forced almost every school, institute, and university to close its doors. Although this disruption has led to learning innovations, it has also dashed hopes of a brighter future among vulnerable populations. All of us pay the price. After all, education is the foundation for expanding opportunities, transforming economies, fighting intolerance, protecting our planet, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As the world continues to battle the pandemic, education, as a fundamental right and a global public good, must be protected to avert a generational catastrophe. Even before the pandemic, some 258 million children and adolescents were out of school, the majority of them girls. And more than half of 10-year-olds in low and middle-income countries were not learning to read a simple text. In 2021, we must seize all opportunities to turn this situation around. We must ensure the full replenishment of the Global Partnership for Education Fund and strengthen global education cooperation. We must also step up our efforts to reimagine education, training teachers, bridging the digital divide, and rethinking curricula to equip learners with the skills and knowledge to flourish in our rapidly changing world. Let us commit to promote education for all, today and every day.
Thank you to the UN Secretary General, and it's a great honor now to have with us the President of the 1715 UN General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Volkan Bozkır. Last week, in our briefing to the General Assembly on your priorities, you urged that the focus on leaving no one behind remain foremost in our minds. We look forward, Your Excellency, to hearing from you on education, namely.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to join you to celebrate the third International Day of Education and Lifelong Learning. Today, I congratulate the global education community who are championing education at this difficult time. I commend our courageous teachers who are adapting their classrooms according to social distancing guidelines in order to provide safe learning environments for their students. I also applaud all parents who are doing their best to facilitate learning at home. To the students tuned in around the world, do not be disheartened. This pandemic will pass. You will return to school with your friends, and you will be equipped with the skills you need to navigate a rapidly changing world and pursue your dreams. Excellencies, today's event is a testament to the agility and relevance of the General Assembly. Just 3 years ago, this International Day was created by member states of the United Nations who believe that education is key to unlocking the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. No one could have imagined that we would soon face the greatest threat to education in history. The education of 1.6 billion learners has been disrupted since the onset of the global COVID-19 pandemic, with over 300 million students still out of school today. Underprivileged learners have been disproportionately impacted as they tend to have fewer educational opportunities beyond school, and their parents may be unable to facilitate learning at home. Moreover, the digital divide prevents those furthest behind from accessing online resources to continue their education. In Western Europe and North America, at least 1 in 7 students do not have access to the internet at home. This figure rises to 80% in sub-Saharan Africa and 88% in least developed countries. Unless we take urgent action, more than 24 million children are at risk of dropping out of school. The COVID-19 pandemic has taught us that we need to urgently reimagine and invest in education if we are to achieve the targets of Sustainable Development Goal 4. In this decade of action, to deliver the SDGs, we must create inclusive systems that are resilient to shocks and accessible to all. This begins with data. Despite progress, many countries still do not collect, report, or utilize data on those furthest behind. Next, we need to adequately finance recovery packages for education, which should include safe and inclusive school reopenings, supporting teachers, investing in skills development, and ensuring connectivity for all learners. We also need to ensure the fair and equitable distribution of vaccines for all, which includes teachers working on the front line of communities. These efforts must go beyond our own borders. If we are to make progress, donor countries will need to utilize multilateral channels and allocate an increased share of ODA to global education efforts. In order to recover better, we must address the social and economic inequalities that hamper our efforts towards ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education for all. If we are to meet the needs of the learners of this generation, we must invest in teacher training, infrastructure, and harness all available technologies. Furthermore, we cannot leave half of our learners behind. Since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action 25 years ago, 180 million more girls have enrolled in primary and secondary school, and enrollment in third-level education has risen threefold. However, the COVID-19 pandemic threatens to erase these hard-earned gains. The Global Education Monitoring Report estimates that 11 million girls and young women may never return to education. Now that they are out of school, girls are more likely than boys to shoulder the burden of household chores and are at greater risk of gender-based violence, early and forced marriage, and early and unintended pregnancy. We cannot rebuild and recover from this global pandemic if we only include 50% of our population. We will need this upcoming generation of women to develop the science behind the next vaccine we need, to teach the next generation, and to design the climate-resilient infrastructure and technology that will allow us to reach those furthest behind. Excellencies, at the SDG Summit of 2019, heads of state and government committed to, I quote, promote and support quality education and lifelong learning to ensure that all children, youth, and adults are empowered with the relevant knowledge and skills to shape more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable societies that are able to adapt to rapid technological change. Unquote. This political declaration is key to accelerating action on education as part of COVID-19 recovery efforts. Let me be clear. SDG 4 is not just about a classroom. It is about society. Inclusive education is the foundation for building a more equal, just, and safer society. Education has the powers to break the cycle of poverty and conflict. Education can also build media and information literacy, producing global citizens who are better able to engage critically in the world. Indeed, none of us would be participating in this event today if we did not have access to education. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaims that everyone has a right to education. At this time of crisis, it is our duty to uphold this right for everyone, everywhere. The world has suffered enough, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We cannot afford to lose a generation of students now. I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to participate in this very important meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for this comprehensive presentation, really inspiring words. Now I turn to Her Excellency Odd Inge Kvalheim, Deputy Permanent Representative of Norway to the UN, representing the UN Group of Friends for Education and Lifelong Learning, a very dynamic, very active and committed group whom I warmly thank. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Stefania. Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Volkan Bozkır, Your Excellency, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, Your Excellency, UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure and honor to join the celebration of the International Day of Education on behalf of the Group of Friends for Education and Lifelong Learning. Proclaimed by the UN General Assembly as a reminder of education's foundational role for peace and development, the day is an opportunity to honor the efforts and achievements of the educators worldwide, to shed light on the remaining challenges, but also recount the growing optimism. Today, we commemorate the tireless efforts of teachers, school administrators, government officials, and other dedicated individuals who have made possible that children and youth continued to learn even against the largest disruption of our education system due to the COVID-19 pandemic. These uncelebrated heroes had to respond and adapt to drastic overnight changes, often without a warning and enough of any preparedness in order to sustain learning for all. Yet, this unprecedented situation reminded us of the importance to build back better and more resilient education systems. It also led to an impressive global, regional, and national mobilization around the provision of education, especially for the most vulnerable. As it stressed the centrality of education for our societies. Consequently, the international community would not take the risk to put to test the validity of the saying, and I quote, "If you think education is expensive, try ignorance." You know too well that peaceful, inclusive, and economically prosperous societies cannot be nourished if educational systems collapse as a result of global threats. Education is an end in itself, but also a means to unlock progress on all sustainable development goals. Education can promote better health outcomes, gender equality, and inclusive economic growth. Education prepares learners for the future of work, but also for efficiently tackling major global challenges. Equipping youth with the right skills to improve their employability, as well as the competences needed to address climate change, persisting inequalities, and other disturbing phenomena such as the spread of disinformation and hate speech, has become a clear imperative today. Therefore, as countries are focusing on the immediate public health, economic, and social welfare responses in tackling the impact of the pandemic, more than ever, ensuring that the learning continues in an equitable way should be a sine qua non for the success of our common efforts. It is particularly important to strengthen universal primary education as the building block upon which all future learning must be based. And I'd like to add also a clear focus on the education of girls, which we know is so important in this regard. Education also plays a critical role in contributing to the maintenance of peace and security, as it provides stability and hope for a better future for children in conflict and post-conflict settings. At the same time, COVID-19 has had exacerbated further the calamity faced by those living in crisis-affected countries, where education is one of the first to be impacted by violence and conflict. Today, more than ever, we must ensure that schools remain safe places, free of conflict and violence, and protect education from attack. As the world advances its response against COVID-19 pandemic, we should sharpen the focus on the educational recovery and revitalization. First, by supporting schools to reopen smartly, safely, and inclusively, while backing all teachers as frontline workers and paying serious heed to the training and professional development. Then, by reimagining and investing in relevant skills and development from the social and economic dimension to gaining competence for new jobs and careers. Also by applying the lessons that transpire from the pandemic response, notably that the right to education has become largely dependent on connectivity, especially internet access, as well as the acquisition of a set of digital skills. Last year, hundreds of millions of children, or almost 47% of primary and secondary students worldwide didn't have access to online learning platforms in the midst of the pandemic. Many learners and educators alike lack the required digital literacy to effectively benefit from the opportunities presented by the new technologies. In order to be able to provide next generations with a more inclusive future, especially in developing countries, we must spare no efforts to bridge the existing and alarming digital divide. Bridging the digital divide will be a long-term endeavor. Low-tech and no-tech solutions for distance learning will continue to be important to ensure that the poorest and most marginalized learners remain connected to the education system. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the year, the UN bodies and forums reflected in their decisions COVID-19's impact on education and learning for children and youth. Resolutions such as the UNGA Omnibus Resolution on COVID-19 response and the Quadrennial Comprehensive Policy Review, key documents guiding the UN development system, called to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning opportunities for all, and recognized education as a driver for sustainable development. In line with the commitments made at the Global Education Meeting in 2020, we call on countries to maintain or increase domestic finance for education. We also call on donors to support the upcoming replenishment of the Global Partnership for Education in July, and to help meet the financing gap for education cannot wait throughout 2023. Finally, we encourage all states, multilateral organizations, and civil society organizations to support the process led by UNESCO to develop a new and better global education cooperation mechanism. Clearly, this crisis presents an opportunity for all stakeholders to come together and deliver on our common goals. Therefore, on the occasion of the International Day of Education, let us stay true to our commitments and work together to safeguard quality, inclusive and equitable education and lifelong learning for all, as the most critical investment for sustainable recovery and future. And you can count on the group of friends of education and lifelong learning to champion education and work to build synergies between the global education architecture and the UN forums. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kvalheim, and thank you for the UN Group of Friends for Education and Lifelong Learning for its continuous support and strong support and commitment. Well, we now come to end of this inspiring opening segment. I pass the floor to Mohamed Sidibe, who will share another exciting session, our first session on learning heroes. Thank you very much, all of you. Enjoy the celebration.
Thank you, Stefania. Excellencies, distinguished guests, all protocols observed. The COVID-19 pandemic has been a seismic shock for education. Almost overnight, schools and universities closed in every country and pivoted to distance learning using low and high-tech channels. Being left behind was the #1 danger of the shift because of poverty, gender, disability, geographical isolation, displacement, or lack of connectivity. For these learners, schools are not only places of learning, they're vital social safety nets. Today, after hearing the commitment of top UN officials, we have decided to kick off this International Day by paying tribute to individuals who took initiatives to keep every student learning in some of the most difficult circumstances. They are proof that the human factor, solidarity, and creativity can turn adversity into opportunity. Let me briefly introduce our speakers for this session. Patience Makandawage from the Campaign for Female Education, Christopher Orley, activist from Burkina Faso, Mala Lolibet Vasquez, teacher from Honduras, Durata Mogotali, a teacher from Albania, Jaime Frost, winner of the Verki Foundation COVID-19 Hero Award, and Isi Ake, head of the Migration and Emergency Education Department at Turkey Ministry of National Education. And last but not least, Alan Goodman, President, Institute of International Education. My first question is to Patience. Patience, you once said, and I quote, "My education is a weapon against poverty. You nearly had to drop out of school because your mother couldn't afford the exam fees. But you went on to excel, became a core trainer for Comfeed, a leading advocate for girls' education and a community leader. Could you tell us how the pandemic affected girls' education in the communities where you work and how you supported girls to keep learning?" The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. The COVID-19 pandemic led to rushed school closures, which left learners uncertain about the possibilities of school reopening. And this crushed their hope for the future, especially for examination classes. Panic, lack of access to information, and myths and misconceptions about the pandemic brought about a cloud of despair among us girls in rural communities. Learning became a luxury, as 80% of learners in my district had no access to any learning materials and online platforms due to lack of network coverage and lack of gadgets to use. The digital divide was laid so bare such that rural learners became more marginalized, exposed to hunger, child labor, early marriages, teen pregnancies, and other forms of abuse. The prolonged school closure shattered any hope for reopening of schools. This prompted me and my fellow Comfort learner guides to come up with two major interventions. Learner guides are the young women educated with Comfort support who now lead life skills and well-being sessions in our schools and communities. The first intervention was to intensify small socially distanced study groups to create a platform for learners to continue to learn and access information about COVID-19, and also to receive psychosocial support to deal with the pandemic. During these groups, learner guides can access and assess the challenges learners are facing and connect them with the authorities, including the food relief programs and child protection units for more help. The second initiative was to gather learning resources from online platforms and sharing with other communities where there is no network and there is no connection. This included instruction videos from the teachers and recordings from Zoom and Skype-based lessons. We then shared with learners' guidance by WhatsApp, and in our other instances, we used our phones and the projectors to ensure that learners continue to learn. In addition, we print out learning materials and send students back questions to the teachers to get support on challenging areas and to improve their learning. This has reignited hope for a brighter future for learners. We have seen about 97% of the learners that we support returning to school and being able to take up their exams with great enthusiasm and confidence. With the latest lockdown, Only Form 4 students are in school right now to take up their exams. The challenge is great because schools across Africa are again closing and some are already closed as COVID-19 cases are still rising. So I cannot stress enough the importance of supporting girls to learn, stay safe and remain hopeful, or their future and potential will be lost in the cycle of poverty and abuse. We have seen the critical importance of comfort dinner guides, local role models and big sisters working together with authorities to make sure every vulnerable child is visible and supported. The agility and grassroots nature of the program means that we are responsive in a crisis and can adapt quickly to support more children. Making sure girls are not left behind is a big task, and it really needs global investment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Patience, for your wonderful intervention. You couldn't have said it better. We as a society, we know we're in trouble when we treat learning as a luxury for the privilege. And thank you for that wonderful intervention. In the interest of time, my next question goes to Christopher Oley. It is estimated that 40% of the poorest countries failed to support learners at risk during COVID-19 crisis. Children and young people with disabilities have been particularly affected by school closures, missing the tools to partake in the distance learning opportunities. In Burkina Faso, you've been a champion for inclusive education. How have you helped children with visual impairment continue to learn despite the pandemic? Christopher, the floor is yours.
Merci, Mohamed. Bonjour.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ole Christophe from Burkina Faso. Here in my country, when the pandemic started, when COVID-19 broke out last March, the initial measures included school closures. So all the children had to stay at home. And the minister responsible for the education system brought in a remote learning program via TV and radio to ensure pedagogical continuity. Obviously, children with disability, in particular visual impairment, were not really included in the design of this program from the beginning. So with the support of Light for the World and with the cooperation of the Ministry responsible for inclusive education, efforts were made to include visually impaired children in the program. But it turned out to be impossible because it wasn't provided for under the budget. Then, when we got to the peak of the epidemic, and got beyond that, there was a desire by the government to reopen schools, and the idea was to avoid missing out completely on a school year. And so classes were open for exams to be taken in the primary and secondary cycles. And by the time they got to that stage, the children had been working at home for 2.5 years, which meant it was very difficult, particularly those with visual impairments. And so we worked with Light on a program to boost literacy using learning materials and special teaching methods. So this project was due to start in the first quarter of last year, but because of the pandemic, that was not possible, and the program was deferred. But with the support of the Monitoring Committee, we were able to suggest that a UN program for Africa work with us on teaching programs so that visually impaired pupils could take the exams. So books were scanned, and this was so they could prepare for their exams. So we started with Word documents that were then scanned to be usable by visually impaired children with the support of specialist agencies. And we also had audio equipment, and we produced files that they could use in that way. And those that were not in Ouagadougou were sent files that could be used on their equipment, say those in the more remote parts of the country. We sent files by WhatsApp, and then these files were placed in the devices used by children. This increased their levels of self-confidence and made it possible for them to prepare for their exams properly. And the results were seen. We saw that there were 14 different exercise books that were adapted, and a large number of children took advantage of this. But there was another challenge in that we didn't have the necessary scanning equipment. We had machines that could scan page by page, but the problem is you have books that are designed in such a way that when they go into a Word document, everything gets mixed up and confused. And so, for example, mathematics books were difficult to convert in that way. But in any case, we were able to start on a whole program of adapting teaching material to visually impaired children's needs. And there are still children who do not have the necessary books and material to improve their learning, but we feel that it was a good start, and we want to thank Light for the World for their support, and also the Ministry of Education deserves thanks for their commitment because they have provided the necessary support. Because they have made efforts to adapt the exercise books to visually impaired children's needs. And the result of this has been that we've been able to produce this in digital file form, which makes it easier to use. So that's what I can say in summary of what we've been able to do here in Burkina Faso for visually impaired children. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention, Christopher. My next question is for Marla Yolibet Vasquez. The pandemic has shown the vital links between school, nutrition, and health. We know that globally over 350 million children missed out on school meals because of closures, raising the risk of malnutrition and hunger. In Honduras, teachers not only took it upon themselves to deliver parcels of food to the students with WFP support, but also learning materials to ensure that learning never stops. Usted es una de esas profesoras.
You are one of those teachers. Could you tell us a little bit more about how this worked? So, ladies and gentlemen, organizers of the conference for the International Day of Education, dear guests, I would say good morning to some, good morning to others. I'm Marla Yolibet Vasquez. I work in the 4th grade here in Honduras, Central America. And 2020, of course, was a year that will go down in history. On the 13th of March, there was an instruction that went out to teachers and school directors that schools be closed to put a stop to the contagion of COVID-19 in Honduras. So this led to great uncertainty because nobody was prepared for that. I was very, very sad to have to stay away from school and not organize classes, especially since not all of us had computers or phones, and of course, no internet access for many. And this turned out to be very difficult to communicate with people. And it was difficult for me to sign up for online courses to learn how to better use the digital tools. And we organized meetings with other teachers. We got together to try to come up with new methodological tools and assessment systems that would be better adjusted to the situation we find ourselves in, taking into account the fact that the school population that we work with is economically poor. They don't necessarily have IT connections or computers or telephones, but everybody has TV and radio. So what we did was take content from our exercise books and try to provide some way of getting this information to them, taking into account, of course, the need to comply with health precautions. And we were able to give homework and receive homework as well. And this did not only have an impact on our teaching methods, but also in terms of food and nutrition, because in our country, and particularly in the place where I work, we've been supported by the World School Food Program, and as I say, it was not just education, but other things as well. Food was very important because it was for some children their only source of food because they are so poor that the only food they had some days was the food provided to them through the school program. And so I was very worried about this as director and as someone who's very familiar with the context. But we tried to devise teaching strategies because we have our food school program committee that works with the students, teachers, or sorry, parents, teachers associations. And we contacted them by phone and told them we would work with them. And we explained what their diet should be. And that food was then distributed to the students depending on their needs. And we checked to make sure that all the parents got necessary information to provide food for their children at home. This is very important because it got parents involved in the children's education program, working with them on homework. And we were pleased to see this as teachers because there was not a lot of school dropout. Most of the children who were enrolled in the years completed it successfully. And what my dream as a teacher is that in the future, we will be able to rely on technological support so that teachers and students, if ever a similar situation reoccurs, we will be better prepared. And it's clear that what we need is some sort of facility for preparing and providing food for our children. And we very much hope that next time we'll get it done better. And we need to be prepared for that. I think we can learn lessons from this pandemic. In some ways, it's eliminated our fears because we found the teachers were able to deal with technologies that people were shy to approach it before, but we've had to do it in this time. We've been forced to get involved with technology and use these technological tools. Thank you all very much. If you have any questions, I'll be pleased to try to answer. And thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
So we're a little behind time, and I would like to remind the rest of the speakers to please try to stick to your allotted time, or even if you can wrap up a little bit earlier, because we have a full schedule ahead of us. So apologies for being the bearer of bad news, but I think we can do this. My next question goes to Durata. In Albania, you've developed videos for national television and also taught on television to help students without internet access to continue learning. What's the recipe for keeping students motivated to learn your television? You have 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Warm greetings to everyone from Albania. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to be part of this important event and share my experience and that of thousands of Albanian teachers during the COVID-19 pandemic situation. I am a language and literature teacher from Albania, a small country in the Western Balkans. In November 2019, an earthquake hit my country and demolished several schools and other buildings. Thousands of children were out of school and other buildings. Thousands of children were out of school. Only 4 months after this earthquake, the first case of COVID-19 was discovered and the country entered on total lockdown. This unfortunately event generated many problems for us teachers, as we are unprepared to provide education in emergency situations. Under this circumstance, we had to find immediate solutions to make sure that education was not interrupted and that no child was left behind. The Ministry of Education made an agreement with the national television for realization of a school program dedicated to the students of pre-university education. The best teachers were invited to film explanatory instructional videos for different subjects. The teaching schedule and instructional videos were shared both on YouTube and on national television. Teachers voluntarily employed teaching resources and sent them to the academy.al YouTube channel. My recipe for successful television teaching is this: select teachers with qualitative digital and professional skills to teach on TV. And the second is use online methods and tools where students can interact from home. Third and final, get feedback from students that are following along online and constantly improving themselves. I think that we are educating a generation for which technology is very important in their life. And I am asking, are we providing them with quality education? And are we preparing them with adequate skills useful for their future? I think that we have a lot to do. Teachers need to be equipped with digital skills and ongoing professional development. Governments need to support teachers, allocate dedicated funds for their professional development and training in order to ensure a prepared workforce. My long experience in teaching and my passion for the teaching professional have taught me that if we all try to do our job as well as we can do it even on unexpected and emergency situations. The 21st century is the century of technology. For this reason, teachers need to be trained and equipped with digital skills to best respond to students' needs every time and everywhere. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for sticking within your time and for your wonderful intervention. My next question is for Jaime Frost. Teaching mathematics is your passion. You developed an online platform, Dr. Frost Math, counting more than 7 million resources that became a lifeline for millions of students during the pandemic. How did this pandemic change your views about online learning tools? And what needs to be done to make them work for all learners and teachers, including in this advantage context? You have 3 minutes.
The most important thing, I think, to start with is to ensure that students have access to a digital device. And whether students do or don't have such devices, perhaps the biggest contributor to educational inequality during the pandemic. Even in the UK, there's been a significant disparity in educational provision. And this has partly been a function of whether schools issue devices to students and the planning of schools in making the most effective use of available technology. This obviously comes at significant government investment, but is a vital issue that's certainly worthy of that investment. When it comes to online learning tools, I think it's important to realise that while technology can't replace the important role of teachers, technology can still be used to replicate or enhance pretty much every aspect of teaching practice, whether it be assessment for learning, teaching instruction, providing work for students that can be monitored, differentiation, and so on. My own platform, drfrostmaths.com, has been perhaps widely used so much during the pandemic because it covers a number of these aspects. It receives around 3 million hits a day and rising, with close to 120 million questions answered the online platform so far. It's used by roughly 7,500 schools in 133 different countries. I'm currently registering as a charity to increase my global reach. There's a number of teaching slides on my site, for example, and exercises for teachers to use in live lessons. And there's an online platform for teachers to set and monitor work and a variety of data analysis tools to see students' progress live throughout. There's also increasingly popular virtual whiteboard where teachers connect with student whiteboards, choose questions for them to do, and see all their annotations in a single view. And there's a game, Dr. Frost Live, where a whole class can play together, and feedback from teachers that they've seen particularly high levels of engagement and enthusiasm from students. And I think that engagement from students is particularly important during sort of remote learning. While much of this functionality already existed before the pandemic hit, I've had to rapidly adapt to the very different way in which students learn remotely. For example, I've had to make my system more live so teachers can better monitor a student task while it's been completed rather than at the end. And with the online game I mentioned, I can no longer rely on the assumption that students can see the teacher's screen. So I've had to build in a remote learning mode that significantly changes configuration of the game. But my site is just one of many available technologies out there, and my own school makes significant use, for example, of Google Classroom. I think my takeaway from this pandemic is that technology doesn't necessarily have to be thought of as a replacement for many of the facets of teaching that we currently can't do in a normal manner. Instead, the effective use of technology is something that should form part of standard teaching practice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jaime. And I mean, you've done a great job in making math accessible, and for that, of course, you were awarded the Verkey Foundation COVID-19 Hero Award, and congratulations on receiving that award. My next question goes to EC, the Minister of National Education in Turkey. Turkey hosts the largest refugee population in the world and has demonstrated exemplary commitments to providing education for refugee children. During the pandemic, the Ministry of National Education, with support from UNICEF, adapted their programs to ensure learning continuity. Could you tell us more about some of the barriers you've had to overcome and some of the lessons learned to reach children with no access to remote learning? You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mohammed. First of all, I would like to greet all participants with respect and affection. I'm the head of the Migration and Education and Emergencies Department in Turkey. As every country in the world, we have also faced some barriers that we had to overcome, and we tried to do our best during this pandemic period. In Turkey, there are over 1,300,000 immigrant students in education age. Due to the rapidly spreading COVID-19 pandemic in the world, some measures are taken by our government. In this context, right after the first case determined in Turkey, distance education started by interrupting face-to-face education. Approximately 800,000 foreign students studying at schools affiliated with our ministry receive education through TRT EBA TV and Education Information Network, which we call EBA. During this period, the following difficulties are encountered in the distance education process of immigrant students. Immigrant students cannot access EBA and TRT EBA TV due to the lack of technological facilities such as computer, tablet, or television at home. Students with learning difficulties and disabilities having difficulties in the distance learning process. And social and emotional development of students is negatively affected because of social isolation process. In order to prevent immigrant students from learning loss during the distance education process, the following measures have been taken in collaboration with UNICEF. MONE have distributed Learn at Home kits in 62 provinces to reduce the effects of pandemic and to support the distance learning process. In this context, the distribution benefited a total of 60,000 Syrian children under temporary protection and 15,000 vulnerable Turkish children. With UNICEF's support, MONE printed approximately 52,000 copies of storybooks, as well as 60,000 Turkish language books. During the pandemic, cash assistance called Safe School Support was provided to about 400 schools based in highly immigrant-populated provinces with the aim of helping them meet their basic cleaning and hygiene needs, including the procurement of hygiene materials and equipment. A total of 500,000 students were benefited from this support. In addition, and finally, Accelerated Learning Program, which is ALP, is implemented in 75 public education centers in 12 provinces in order to integrate Syrian children who are out of the formal education system. It's aimed to direct children to formal and non-formal education opportunities appropriate for their ages. During the pandemic, a training set consisting of 14 books and 4,000 personal care packages for students were distributed for the education of ALP students. As I finish my words here, I wish the pandemic will end worldwide as soon as possible and that we don't have a lost generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You see, I wish the same as well, that the pandemic will end and that we will continue this fight for providing quality of education to every child. My last question goes to Alan Goodman, the president of the Institute of International Education. IIE has been promoting international student exchange for over a century, but this pandemic put us before an altogether different set of challenges for higher education students. They are the group most at risk of quitting their studies because of the pandemic economic impact. Many are suffering from social isolation. Your institute launched an emergency fund to help international students on US campuses facing financial hardship. What has been the response and how do you use this crisis how do you see this crisis durably affecting students' mobility? You have 3 minutes.
Mohammed, thank you very much for the question and all for convening and participating in this day. At IIE, where I work, every day for us is an International Education Day. This is our 12th pandemic since we were founded in 1919, but it's really the only one that affected every major international education destination country at the same time. And it occurred right in the middle of an academic term. So helping international students who simply could not go home as campuses had to close presented for us really unprecedented challenges. By the end of March in the United States, over 700,000 international higher ed students remained here and suddenly faced questions about housing, financial support, basic needs, including where the next meal is coming from. And many banking and travel services in their own countries were suspended, so they didn't have an opportunity as the summer approached to return home or replenish their funds. So it changed for us how we define student emergencies. We used to define it as in the wake of a natural disaster. There was a defined beginning, a defined end. The concentration of need was very region-specific, sometimes very student-specific. There was nowhere near the global nature of this, and the aid that they needed to stay in school was really short-term to have people understand that there were people on our campuses and at our institute that really cared. By April, we realized that international students were going to need support for the entire summer. The need was very great. In a matter of a few weeks, we were able to mobilize $3 million to help international students who were stranded as their campuses began to develop summer plans. And the stunning thing was that in 3 weeks, we gave out all the money. That's how quickly people needed help. COVID-19, consequently, gives us all an idea of the scale required when we face the next global pandemic. And for sure, it gives us a handbook of best practices to be ready when the next crisis, the next pandemic strikes. And maybe that's the silver lining. We now know what to do on day one, week one, month one. We also know, based on our experience, that after every pandemic, international student mobility resumes very rapidly and also grows very substantially. So in conclusion, let me say that we're preparing for that. It is indeed one type of a surge all of us will truly welcome. Again, my thanks to UNESCO and Mohammed for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. You just said something very important as I wrap up this segment of today's event, that we now know what we need to do for the next pandemic. And the question I would like to leave everyone with is, are we willing to do what's required for the next pandemic to ensure that we move quickly, we mobilize funds, and we make sure that the nationality or gender of a child does not determine the type of education that they receive in terms of an emergency. Thank you, everyone. And I would now like to pass the event over to the next moderator, Joe Byrne, the Chief Technical Officer at the Global Partnership for Education.
Mohammed, wonderful to see you and to hear the panel and to hear all the panelists. I've been listening with great interest, and I think the next panel will pick up on some of the themes that you were also highlighting. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jo Byrne. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for GPE, as Mohammed said. And we're going to talk and continue on this conversation around, innovation, whether it be pedagogy, technology, partnership, or other fronts that are, maybe paving the way towards more resilient and inclusive education systems, which was one of the messages that Mohammed just summed up with. We know that with COVID-19, school closures, the world has witnessed this unprecedented efforts among global education actors, schools and teachers in particular, and governments, to safeguard the education of children and ensure the continuity of learning while children are at home. Innovative remote learning modalities have been explored by all of these actors, private sector included, to reach children wherever they are. And in the process has highlighted this kind of knowledge, this fact that learning can take place even beyond the school gates. Now, only time will tell how successful these strategies have been and for whom. And with evidence of exacerbated inequities, the most marginalized girls often being at the raw end of the deal, knowing who these innovations are reaching is really important. But we're learning this valuable lesson. Even when children are not in school, and many of us who are parents will be seeing this for ourselves as well firsthand, they can be given opportunities to learn and to participate effectively to enjoy their right to education if done well. So this short panel bears light on many of the ways in which individuals and organisations and partners have shifted their approach under COVID to enable children to keep learning and for education to continue. So I'll start by introducing the panel, and then I will turn to each in turn. So we have Her Excellency Victoria Angulo Gonzalez, who is the Minister of National Education, Colombia, and a member of the SDG Education 2030 Steering Committee. I'm also extremely pleased to have on the panel today Ranjit Singh Desali, who is the winner of the 2020 Global Teacher Prize. A big congratulations to you. Really exciting to hear about some of the work that you've been doing. We have Otto Auredan, who is the founder of Slums to School Africa. Oleg Figlin, Vice President for Europe, Middle East and Africa of Blackboard. And finally, last but not least, Doreen Bogdan-Martin, who is the Director of the Telecommunication Development Bureau of the International Telecommunications Union, ITU. So Minister Gonzalez, if I could turn to you, I don't know if you can put your camera on. From the outset of the pandemic, Colombia has introduced Hello, nice to see you. So from the outset of the pandemic, Colombia has introduced innovative policies to promote learning continuity, equity, and inclusion at all levels of the system. So 10 months on, what are your top 3 reflections on the pandemic's impact and influence on Colombia's national education approach? And you have 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thanks, Stefania and UNESCO, for this great opportunity to share our experience and for talk about be a real global teamwork. Today, I will speak in Spanish. Muchas gracias por tener esta oportunidad de celebrar el Día Internacional de la Educación por tercera vez con la voz de
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to take part in this International Day of Education so that we can get Colombia's message across and Latin America.
Let me point to some key messages about how we've got through this pandemic. The first is that our pre-COVID development plan was called Act for Colombia and Equity. And this is very important because more than ever, it's important to give equitable access to education. And we couldn't lose sight of that, either because of the COVID or because of our challenges going forward. On that basis, we decided to take a decision in the light of the information we have that children should stay at home. And so we started home learning. All countries have done that in different ways. We use various platforms, mobile phones, radio, TV, internet connections, and also we provided a home food program and provided families and institutions with economic support, knowing that our focus was to make sure that no children got left behind out of the system by staying at home, especially in the rural areas. Second lesson that we've learned about home learning is that we needed to get mobilized and prepared very quickly with other sectors, health, for example, so as to get children back to school. How could we safely reopen? And so we drew up guidelines and protocols last year so that we could reduce the levels of uncertainty and apprehension. We provided as much information as possible, and we devised return to school pilot programs, and we put in place biosecurity precautions, and we ensured connectivity infrastructure across various regions so that we could have a reopening program run safely. And from education and health, the message went out very strongly that it was very important to get back to school. And in particular, we focused on problems of domestic violence related to the COVID. And so our challenge is to reactivate the system by the end of this first quarter. And we have been working proactively with the teachers. We have to identify learning gaps and assess in order to move forward so that we could work on emotional and cognitive education and help directors and teachers. We know that this year we're going to have the major challenge of vaccination, and that's vital in order to reactivate our system. So it'll be an alternate system based on some at school, some at home, depending on the peaks. And we want to appeal to children's desire to play and their emotions. And that's what we'll be doing this year in 2021. And in particular today, on the International Day of Education, we kick off with our school program. And some regions have home learning, others involve school presence. I think it's very important to continue providing as much scientific information to families as possible and make it very clear to them that we have this slogan, that our war is about getting people back to school. It's a right to education, the right to continue learning, creating spaces for interaction, for playing and learning. We have to base ourselves on scientific facts, and we have to work with the families. That's to say, there are mothers who've had to drop out of the labor market. We need to work with them. and we need to exploit the potential of multiple platforms, and at the end of the day, contribute to reactivating our society, because one of the major challenges now is education. So that's my message to management. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you.
Thank you. A truly inspiring set of directions. You've talked about, obviously, the political commitment to equity and inclusion. You've talked about the leadership of the government, including working in partnership with other parts of government. You've talked about use of data. And also thank you for mentioning, of course, the need to look at the health, domestic violence issues as part and parcel of the response. So truly inspiring. Somebody else who is truly inspiring, I'd like to please turn to Ranjitsin Desali. Welcome. If you can put your camera on, do, but I understand connectivity is not always perfect. But let me start with the question. Well before the pandemic, you used technology to transform teaching and learning in marginalized communities and beyond. The pandemic has really shaken assumptions about when, where, and how learning happens. So how have you seen teachers adapt to school closures and to the demands of remote learning? And what shifts in pedagogy do you think are here to stay? And what do teachers need to do to improve their practice? So a lot there, but I know you've got a lot of experience in this space. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Joe, for inviting me. And it's really great to share my experience with you all amazing guys. So let's turn about to your question. What exactly teachers did during the pandemic when they were told that now you cannot host the online or the face-to-face classes. So teachers being told to host online classes, and teachers were not trained for that. You know, everywhere in India and across the world, teachers are being trained to host the face-to-face classes. But the shift from face-to-face to online, it took some time. So teachers, tried to understand and try to learn the new technology, which software is best compatible to them, how to engage the classroom online, how to give the tests, how to evaluate students. So there were so many questions before the teachers. But by the time teachers feel comfortable during the online classes, so I think by the time they adopted this technology, they used to conduct the online classes, and now I see more teachers are now feeling comfortable while conducting the online classes. But during the online classes, what exactly teachers need to do? On the when you conduct the online classes, you cannot go for the traditional way of teaching, right? So during that online classes, you need to engage the classroom virtually. As the teachers, they are not, having the good pace, and they can looks like a hero. They can catch the attention of attendees. It's not like that. But with the help of technology, teachers should understand how they can engage the classrooms, how their lesson plan and how their teaching becomes more impactful, so that learners should learn much better way than they were learning in the face-to-face classroom or in the that classroom. So in this way of teaching, I think teachers should focus on two things. The first is that they should change the strategy and teaching methodologies. Like, it's more about project-based learning. Here in this pandemic, you cannot go for the traditional way of teaching, lecture method or other things. So nature and the families are the safest source of knowledge for students during the pandemic. So teachers should consider how they can take help of families and nature, so that they could play a role of a teacher, like sharing the information, having a source of knowledge. And based on these two resources, teachers should plan their lesson plans. As I told you, project-based learning method is the best method during the pandemic. I have already experienced. I have given some projects to my students, and we do develop some of the skills like creativity, communications, critical thinking, and how to make decisions based on the data, based on the information they have collected. So I think for me, during the pandemic, teachers should change the strategy, accommodate themselves, be comfortable with whatever the software they are using, whatever the technology they are using, but the focus should be on teachers and students engagement, and make sure that every student is learning during the pandemic. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. And as somebody who trained as a teacher and taught in a former life, I couldn't agree more with you on just the importance of this engagement and project-based learning and how many opportunities it can provide. So it's great to see how people are thinking this through in terms of adapting to the online platforms that they now have as teachers. But of course it does take it's a professional development toll on teachers. So I'm actually really pleased now to turn to Oleg Figlin from Blackboard. I don't know if you want to turn your camera on. So you're a member of the Global Education Coalition launched by UNESCO with partners, and part of supporting learning continuity through innovative alliances. You've contributed to expertise on technology-enabled learning. So one example has been in the Caribbean, where Blackboard Academy is implementing professional development project for teachers, just as we were talking about, in this area of blended and online teaching and learning. So big question here, but what are you learning from this capacity building program? And how can we scale up such initiatives? And do you think we're reaching a sort of turning point in teachers' receptivity to online and blended learning? And I think that's a bit of a loaded question because it assumes that they weren't receptive, and I think that's not right. But obviously, this is demanding a different set of skills for teachers. So over to you.
Absolutely, and I think there are a few questions here. But first of all, thank you, Joe, for the question, and I'm really delighted to be part of the panel today. Before we start, I'm not sure if most of the audience know who Blackboard are, and we're a global education technology company with more than 20 years of experience. And we serve thousands of school institutions, organizations in more than 100 countries. Our mission is to advance learning together with the world's education community so that all learners, educators, and institutions can realize the goal today and prepare for tomorrow. And I feel that our mission correlates very well with the UNESCO Global Coalition and what they're trying to do during these days. And we are really delighted to be part of this program. As for Blackboard Academy Professional Development Project, it is really a wonderful example of precisely how we can advance learning together. I heard many panelists today spoke about the necessity of having the right skills during these days. And I think that's exactly what we are trying to do, but also how we can scale it to masses. So I think what we did in the Caribbean is a great example on how you can really scale digital education to masses in a very short time frame. Our program by Blackboard Academy has been based on 3 key pillars: teachers, infrastructure, and community. First, we collaborate with UNESCO local authorities in order to identify teachers, what I call them local champions, who are then enabled by our consultants in the facilitation of online courses. Second, we have provided them with a high-quality course material and reliable digital learning environment, basically all the tools you would need to deliver these courses successfully. And last but not least, all these course graduates became part of the community of practice to share experiences and be supported by local or Blackboard facilitators. Just to give you an idea of some numbers, we started by enabling a group of 40 champions from different schools. We have provided all the materials and tools necessary to disseminate this knowledge in their schools and sub-regions. And I can tell you that one of the most satisfying aspects for this project is that this support and knowledge sharing circle keeps growing every day to train over 2,000 teachers in the region, aiming to cover at least 100 schools per country. Now, Joe, you've asked me if we are reaching a turning point in teacher receptivity to online and blended learning. And I certainly believe so. As you know, learning models have transformed across the globe. We are truly inspired by the impressive response of administrators, educators, students, and institutions. And let me share just a few examples just to reflect this impactful shift. I think the numbers speak for themselves. In the last year alone, we saw almost 4,000% increase in a daily virtual classroom use. We see 25 billion weekly interaction on Blackboard Learning Management System alone, and more than 1.5 million monthly downloads of alternative content. These are some amazing numbers. And I think every educator realizes by now that online or blended learning is not an option any longer, it's a must. Although these truly impressive numbers, we need also to understand that the learning gap in many countries is still impending reality, and we need to keep working together to help close it. And finally, I would like to thank UNESCO for partnering with Blackboard to truly provide education for all. That's what we do. And we believe that this initiative strengthens the teacher's ability to respond to the current crisis in the local environment, as well as strengthen the resilience of the education system for future shocks. I'm really excited about what lays ahead and how we can really scale it to other countries as well.
Thank you, and thank you obviously for the contribution that you're making to this unprecedented challenge. And as you said, it takes all of us moving and pulling together, and you're seeing that through your engagement. So thank you very much for that intervention. I'm going to move now to Otto Auredan from Slums to School Africa. Otto, if you're here, I hope you can put your camera on.
Hello, Byrne.
Oh yeah, you're coming. Hi, thank you. So
I'm here, but I can't put my camera on. I'm not sure. I think the host might need to help with that.
As long as you're here. Slums to School works in communities with high numbers of out of school children, and every speaker so far has talked about this inequity. But you are bringing children to school, or where needed, schools to children, in the case of your Learning Virtual Centre. So how has COVID-19 affected or expanded your education efforts to reach these vulnerable children? And what are some of the, I'd say, foreseeable challenges or opportunities that you see?
So I think it's interesting when you look at the context of Nigeria. Is that Nigeria the fastest growing nation in the world? We have the fastest growing population, from 200 million people presently. We are projected to have 400 million in 30 years, which means we're going to have one of the world's largest number of young people. And unfortunately, we have a huge number of out of school children, which also stands as the highest in the world. About 16 million children who are currently out of school. And these are the issues and the threats that really gave birth to Slums to School in 2012, when we realized that it was important that as young people, we came together and started finding out innovative ways to ensure that young people and children in underserved communities, remote villages, IDP camps, were not left out. And so our intervention has seen, the impacts grow across communities and reached thousands of children. But then the pandemic, came in 2020 in March, and all our learners were forced to, to stay back at home. And so it was important for us to find innovative ways to create solutions to ensure that those young people were still learning. And so it wasn't just enough to have like a learning management system that was, set up, or to provide tablets or laptops or internet and headsets, but to create what we call the pseudo classroom, where it felt like we still had the children in the same room, even though they were connected virtually from different parts of the country. And so we built the first virtual learning studio, not just in Nigeria, but on the African continent. We were able to connect about 1,000 young people into the virtual classroom. Through our partners and several individuals, we were able to buy tablets. And it was really interesting seeing how those young people were able to maximize the resources. We had so many of them whose performance did not just improve in the learning outcomes, but even in their lifestyle, in their digital literacy, in their STEM and technology. So we saw lots of very great growth. Now, one very important thing that also stood out was the fact that we built what we call learning clusters in various communities, because these young people couldn't go to school, but they were still across the community playing. We had lots of children. And so we were able to bring them into little clusters. And what that taught us as well was the fact that learning doesn't just have to happen in the four walls of a classroom. In remote communities, and this is very important and very significant, because with a growing number of young people and with the poor infrastructure, where we don't have the commensurate number of schools to accommodate those young people. We realized that learning can happen in the communities, in little clusters. And it's very interesting because that's a program that we are currently scaling. In fact, UNICEF is one of the partners we are looking at working with to reach 550,000 children across northern Nigeria. Now, this was only achieved because of the pandemic. And we believe that with several partners and several organizations, there's so much more that can be done. The Virtual Learning Studio is the first of its kind here, but we believe that in the coming months, we're going to scale that to reach thousands and hundreds of thousands of children.
Thank you so much. I mean, the few visits I've done to Nigeria, I've always been really struck by the scale of the challenge, but also by this, you know, the thirst for learning and the different ways that people are trying to tackle that, particularly at community level. So I was really interested in what you were saying about combining the sort of learning clusters, which also meets the social emotional needs of children to be together with the virtual classroom. Really interesting. But of course, an important part of that is going to be this continued expansion of connectivity, and that's great because my final speaker is going to talk to us a little bit about that, but thank you so much. So last but not least, we have Doreen Bogdan-Martin from ITU. And like I just said, a common theme that's running through our panel, an overall discussion on COVID and education, is around education, technology and connectivity. And I know in GP's response to COVID, we have a very vast mixture of online, offline, low tech, no tech responses, largely because the connectivity is not always there in the countries where we're working. So GIGA, which is a partnership between ITU and UNICEF, is seeking to connect every school in the world to the internet and every young person to information, opportunity and choice. I really hope you can make that happen. So, you know, tell us please, how is GIGA bringing innovation to education and sort of really paving the way forward to this more resilient and inclusive education systems that can really carry the innovations that we've heard people speak about today. So over to you, Doreen. Do feel free to turn your video on if you can.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joe. I'm trying to turn my video on, but it says the host has stopped it. Oh, there we go, I think. Yes. Hi there. Nice to see you. It's great to be here. As the UN Secretary General said in the opening, and this of course was echoed by the PGA and the UNESCO DG, we have to step up our efforts to reimagine education. And of course that includes bridging the digital divide, rethinking curricula to equip learners with the skills and the knowledge to flourish in our rapidly changing world. And of course, the SDGs depend on it, and we're only 9 years out to 2030. So I'm really excited to be able to share with you our contribution to recovering and to revitalizing education, and that is GIGA. Launched in 2019 by the ITU and UNICEF, we are now actively working with 14 governments to create investment opportunities for blended public and private sector funding, to build the infrastructure needed to provide universal access to schools, and to equip learners with high quality, vetted, and safe content. And as we're talking about innovations in this panel, let me briefly highlight 3 ways that GIGA is bringing innovation to education and helping to pave the road towards more resilient and inclusive education systems. Firstly, we are pioneering innovations in mapping connectivity demand. Worldwide, we've now mapped over 800,000 schools using existing ITU mapping data and national data banks. We are also leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies to improve our mapping capabilities. And we're helping countries around the world map their previously unmapped schools, showing how technology can dramatically speed up the process and generate valuable insights at scale that can't be achieved using conventional survey techniques. And it's great to see the Minister of Colombia here with us, as Colombia was one of the first countries where GIGA helped to contribute to the mapping efforts. So the second innovation is around financing. Who's going to pay and how are we going to make that sustainable? So GIGA is using the principles of demand aggregation, lowering cost of infrastructure and risk diversification to support leaders in developing sustainable financial models for universal digital access through, for example, subsidizing market creation costs and incentivizing private sector investment. Our third innovation is around partnerships. We know that bridging the digital divide is going to be all about collaboration, and GIGA is serving as a powerful partnership in its own right. And as an example, Ericsson became the first private sector partner to make a multi-million-dollar commitment to the GIGA initiative. We have SoftBank investment advisors helping us to craft country-specific financial models and business cases to attract investments. We also have Dubai Cares, who will also be supporting GIGA with empowering local entrepreneurs and leveraging the resources from the private and public sectors in new ways essential to closing the digital divide. We're also pleased to be co-chairing together with our UNESCO friends, Huawei, Ericsson, the Broadband Commission Working Group on Digital Learning. This group will provide guidance on innovative approaches to education and training recovery. And in closing, of course, education systems need to be transformed to become more agile, more resilient, and more innovative. We need school systems to be shock absorbent and crisis respondent. And we believe that GIGA provides the global platform that will help us to achieve that goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You were the last speaker of our panel. I will wrap up in just 2 minutes probably, but I did want to thank you for that. And there was so much in there. I particularly picked up as you were talking this, global reach, the global partnership, the bringing people in, the doing many things differently. But you also talked about and looking at it from a country specificity point of view. And I think that's so important when we're talking about education and talking about taking things to scale. So, that was a really lovely mixture of the big thinking and the making it work for countries. So thank you for that. That's the end of our panel. So I'd like to say thank you to all of our panelists. I hope everyone found that as inspiring as I did. I'm trying to think about my 3 key takeaways. I think, one of them very clearly is this, I think somebody said blending learning's here to stay. It's a must. The innovation is very much about how do we learn together? How do we help systems adapt? Through innovative partnerships, technology, and pedagogy. So important that we think about pedagogy in the student experience. Every single one of our speakers in different ways talked about the importance of equity, of reaching the most marginalized, be that the national policy that the Minister of Education was talking about, to what Dinsali said, we have to reach and teach every student. And that was very much something that everybody picked up. But I think the third thing that I picked up in particular through all the panelists, and our last speaker really summed it up, is, we're in a space now where we have opportunities, and we should grasp opportunities to help systems become more agile and more resilient, more innovative and shock absorbers. And so much of that is about, trying new things, learning, using the data and evidence to learn whether these things are working or not, very quickly being able to course correct if it's not, change direction, but continually strive for the vision that many people talk about on the International Day of Education, of course, which is around equity and quality. So I am now turning back, thank you very much to the panelists, to Stefania Giannini, who's the ADG of UNESCO. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, and your inspiring panelists. And your 3 takeaways bring me directly to the topic of this panel, which is financing the education transformation reset. There's a lot of inspiring words and initiatives described in the previous panel, and now it's about discussing a bit how better, more education can be funded, especially this year in this recovery phase. Well, a few words before introducing our 6 outstanding panelists today. Education cannot recover and revitalize without an adequately financed recovery package. This is something we heard many times in the opening session today. And this urgency led many of our organizations to join forces, definitely, under the Save Our Future campaign last year to advocate and raise awareness about the impact of this unprecedented disruption of learning. Commitment to protect education financing was made clearly at the Global Education meeting convened last October, but protecting domestic education budgets and levels of international aid is essential, but only a first step in a severely underfunded sector like education is. What do you need now? We need the stimulus packages that include a realistic education component, especially to support the most marginalized students return to school and catch up on lost learning. Investing now in such measures will lower the bill later, so to say. To reach those most in need, financing for equity should be at the heart of the recovery. The Global Education Monitoring Report will present some new research on this, and Manas is in this panel, and thanks to him for that. And the G7, the replenishment of the Global Partnership for Education, and the G20 must be the opportunity we seize this year to step up the pressure for increased equitable financing for education. I'm sure Alice Albright will very much focus on this part. So let me quickly present the panel and kindly ask you to keep to your skipping time as we are a bit racing against the clock. We have today as our panelist Nyarazai Gumbonzanva, African Union's Goodwill Ambassador on Ending Child Marriage and Chief Executive of Rosaria Memorial Trust, Alice Albright, CEO of Global Partnership for Education, Manos Antoninis, Director of the GEM report here at UNESCO, Rafat Sabah, President of the Global Campaign for Education, Yasmin Sharif, Director of Education Cana to Aid, Jaime Savedra, Director of Education Global Practice at the World Bank, can be available, unfortunately, and send the video to be with us. Thanks for that. But let's begin with a message from Jutta Urpilainen, the European Commissioner for Partnership, before we go into discussion. Thanks for having the video.
Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Nelson Mandela could have not been more right. After decades of improving access to and quality of education for all, the COVID-19 pandemic is casting shadow on our progress. But education still is the most powerful tool to build back better. On the third International Day of Education, we must not forget that education is the great equalizer in our societies and central to addressing climate change. Education unlocks the potential of digital technologies and creates a skilled workforce. Obviously, education is crucial for the future of all children. For all these reasons, I have decided to boost the share of education funding to partner countries under my responsibility from 7% to 10%. Investing in education today is a solid bet for the future. It will lead to a more sustainable and fair world for the COVID-19 generation. So let's together change the world with better education for all.
Thank you very much to Commissioner Urpilainen, and also for confirming this important commitment from her side, from the European Commission, one of the main donor at global level. And let me start with the first question to Nyarazai. You are a fierce advocate for ensuring that financial resources reach communities and are targeted where they are needed mostly. How do we do this better? And what happens when resources are used effectively?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Stefania, for inviting me and for that great question. I'm responding as an African woman sitting in a village, wondering where the internet would drop any minute from now. I'm surrounded by mines, I'm surrounded by agricultural potential, and yet with the highest prevalence of child marriage, HIV, poor education outcomes. And as AU Goodwill Ambassador, I feel the groans and the pains of children in this COVID era every day on the continent. But as I sit in the IMF advisory meetings, the UN policy platforms, and my action aid networks, I see the need for daring, bold, and courageous leadership now on education financing. We need both more financing and better targeted and more accountable financing. Our main focus should be on domestic financing. This is where the real crisis is, given the fall that we know is there in the GDPs and the tax revenues. The question is how? How can we achieve that? There are 5 key actions that I'm proposing and recommending. First, let's take action, that bold, courageous action for longer term debt suspension and preferably debt cancellations, so that countries are not forced to pay back on debts whilst they are cutting on education. We do not need austerity measures that really put a strain on education. So debt cancellation is critical for us to release the funds and the resources that are necessary for our governments to be able to keep more on spending on education. Secondly, we must request, demand, or encourage the IMF to issue $2 trillion in special drawing rights, which would give at least 250 billion in urgently needed resources for Africa. We know the previous US administration was not supportive of this, and therefore we hope that the new administration of President Biden would be supportive of this reissuing of the special drawing rights, because it's essential that we have these resources and flow into education. Thirdly, we must continue to take action on the ambitious progressive tax reforms. Yes, tax reforms are so critical for domestic financing, so that we are able to put more resources from our own countries to spend more on education. And this is in the longer term. We know that education is a basic right, it's a priority, it's a public good, and therefore our governments must resource. Fourthly, it's about prioritizing those resources for girls' education, for children with disabilities and the most excluded, for the girls who have experienced child marriage to have a second chance in life. It's not enough to talk about gender equality without investing in making sure that it's a reality for the majority. But we may have all these resources, as long as they do not reach the local school, that technology does not reach the local school, that infrastructure is not adequate at the local school, we may continue to have so many policy documents and commitments which are not transformative. So we need school level budget tracking, a great engagement of civil society. There's extensive work that has been done over decades on gender responsive budgeting. But this is the time that we go beyond budgeting and planning to ensuring that it's about accountability, implementation, accountability, and impact. Definitely international aid is critical. Whether we're talking about the GPE replenishment, Education Can't Wait, or the World Bank initiatives, or local philanthropy in our own communities. I run Rosaria Memorial Trust. People give, local philanthropy exists. But all this must complement domestic financing. It is the primary responsibility of the state and our governments to provide for education. So all the other resources that we may be advocating for must complement domestic financing as crucial. And lastly, I'm crying with one eye. I know how tough it is when our children are not going to school. I know the pain I live with every day where I am. I witness it, I experience it, I've seen it, including today. I'm also motivated and smiling with another eye when I see an extraordinary commitment. Thank you to UNESCO, to GPE for this extraordinary hosting. Thank you to the EU Commission and Commissioner for that commitment to increase from 7% to 10% for education. The commitment Norway expressed. Thank you so much. Again, COVID-19 demands of us to talk about equality beyond equity. It's not about leaving no one behind. It's also about us doing business differently, including on financing. Again, thank you so much for inviting me, and definitely remain on our feet to continue to push the issue of resources. And I wish us the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nyarazai, for these concrete proposals and focusing on domestic financing, as well as the human side of the impact of this crisis on education you mentioned. And about equity and the way and the need of thinking, acting differently, I'm moving to Alice Albright, CEO of GP, and a great partner with us and a great champion for education globally. Well, GP has a new strategic plan and ambitious financing campaign to achieve by July this year. You can say it would be a critical year for education and GP as well. I would like to know from you, Alice, what are the shifts that GP has made in its new strategic plan, and how will these shifts help us recover and revitalize education?
Thank you very much, Stefania. Let me wish everybody a happy International Day of Education. Let me first make sure everyone can hear me and see me.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, perfectly.
Stefania, you're nodding. I'm going to assume that's a yes. It's wonderful to be here with everybody on a very important day, particularly as we all are thinking so much about how to recover from the pandemic. So let's talk about what has not shifted first within our new strategy, and then I'll move to what has shifted. So what has not shifted is our soul. We are a thriving partnership. We are committed to working closely with all of our stakeholders. And at the heart of that commitment is a desire to leave no child behind from the opportunity to get a quality education. So that has not changed. And since we were founded now close to 20 years ago, 160 million more children have gone to school in partner countries. So we will never lose our eagle-eye focus on getting the most marginalized children into school. Second thing that has not changed is working at scale. This past year, we've approved $1.5 billion worth of approvals that will go to countries in the form of grants, and $1 billion of that will have been dispersed. This was calendar year 2020. So we continue to be committed to working at scale and working very efficiently. And we've got a track record of working in the right places at the right times on the right issues, and issues that are very much top of mind for countries. As part of this, we became last year the largest provider of COVID funding to help countries recover from the impact that the pandemic has had on education. That is focused on distance learning, reopening schools, and some of the other issues tied up in recovery. What has shifted? And let me just touch on three things here. The first one is boldness and continuing to reach, particularly given the urgent situation that we find ourselves in. So we've now crafted a strategic plan that has worked on transformation, adaptation, and giving countries a wide set of tools to work on transforming their education systems so that they can deliver better. The second thing that has changed is, or it's really shifted into a higher gear, I should say, is our focus on equity. Some years ago, we were focused on gender equity. We then shifted to gender equality. We then have hardwired it throughout our entire strategy. And we've now set up a specific funded window to give countries additional funding to invest in girls' education. So we have really gotten into a higher gear on gender. Third thing is continuing to sharpen our focus on domestic financing. And I really welcome the points of Dr. Nyarazai before me. Beforehand, we were focused on domestic financing. We have again stepped up that commitment. Now, in order to get GPE's largest scale grants, governments must commit to making significant investments in education. In addition to looking at the volume of those investments, we will also look at the equitable distribution of that funding and the efficiency of that spend. So we continue to refine and step up our overall commitment to domestic financing. Just to sum up, what does all this mean? It means that GPE has put itself in a position to help countries respond to what is perhaps the worst crisis that the education sector has faced in the modern age. And so we've stepped up with urgency, we've stepped up with money, we've stepped up with new tools, and we've stepped up with an even higher sense of urgency to put this issue on the top of the agenda. So let me stop there and welcome the rest of the comments. I look forward to hearing from everybody else, but thanks again, Stefania, for including us.
Thank you very much, Alice. And let me recall, just referring to these last points, urgency and quick reaction to the crisis, the great job the GPE has done last year, opening so fast the urgency, emergency window in order to let also the other partners like UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank, and all the others to join forces to react and give solutions to member states. Thank you very much for that as well. Well, this brings me to the third panelist, Manos Antonini is director of the GEM report. Manos, in 2020, last year, the GEM report launched PEER, an online monitoring tool with systematic, comprehensive national descriptions of laws and policies on issues central to achieving SDG 4. The first set of profiles was on inclusion in education, and today the GEM report is launching a second set of profiles, which are focusing on what countries do through financing to promote equity in education. Equity is another key word we heard this day many times. What are the core findings, and based on these, what recommendations do you have for how countries can better achieve equitable financing?
Thank you, Stefania, and greetings to everyone. It's good that the program has put me after Alice, who emphasized equity in her presentation. It's true that since 2015, there has been a strong focus on monitoring education disparities and a lot of data to allow us to do that. But there has been less attention on how to summarize and compare country efforts to close these gaps. It is for this reason that we created the PEER website last year. Of course, its name alludes to its intended purpose, to support and promote policy dialogue and peer learning. So as you mentioned, the first, that's to cover all ranges of policies that are central to achieving SDG 4. So today we have published a policy paper to mark the addition of this second set of profiles on what countries do to promote equity in education through financing. And I'm saying that because there are several ways in which countries can reduce gaps in education opportunities, only one of which is through financing. But the importance of financing for equity is recognized in one of the SDG 4 indicators. It is an example of a new generation of indicators that emphasize the formative aspect of monitoring, the need for countries to learn from each other and not just to be ranked. We focus on three issues. First, we identified 4 types of financing policies and programs that can improve equity in education. Second, we examined 3 dimensions: how comprehensive they were, what populations they covered, and what volume of support they provided. We suggested ways to distinguish smaller from larger efforts that countries are making. And third, we reviewed material on policies and programs in about 80 countries. The analysis suggests that 1 in 5 countries demonstrated a strong focus on equity in education through financing. By contrast, more than half of low and middle income countries' overall financing mechanisms do not take local governments and schools' relative disadvantage into account. Upper middle income countries appear to be doing relatively better, although many of them, as well as many high income countries, also struggle. But it is mainly poorer countries, notably in sub-Saharan Africa, that have very limited financing policies to promote equity. Of course, a lack of funding for them is a major constraint, but we noted that some countries maintain policies that are actually benefiting wealthier students. Inevitably, how we have grouped countries, can have its errors, may never be perfect. Information may be unavailable, out of date, or misleading. Context matters, how decentralized countries are, or how they structure their budget. Many donor-driven programs are not sustainable. Countries do not incorporate them in their budget. There may be design or administration issues, which means that program intent is often not realized. Even with the right ingredients, some programs may not reduce disparity in education. But the aim, and that's a key message for me today, is not to be conclusive. It is rather to help initiate a debate on the value of monitoring policies and programs that aim to promote equity in education through financing. And providing a framework is just the beginning. What is also needed is engagement by governments, and especially by regional organizations, which can help such peer discussions. There's no point monitoring without a forum in which findings can be exchanged, debated, contested, and reflected upon. Allow me to conclude with the following observation. Over the past 20 years in international development, the education sector and the health sector, with which it is frequently compared, have moved in opposite directions in terms of their emphasis. Education has moved from a focus on universal basic education to a focus on outcomes such as learning. Health, after achieving major progress on monitoring outcomes, has shifted its attention to achieving universal health coverage. It has accompanied that with the building of mechanisms that help countries learn from each other, such as the Joint Learning Network for Universal Health Coverage. Education should not ignore this dimension. Maybe the time has come for a joint learning network for equity in education, to support countries to place the issue at the heart of their agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Manos, also for keeping the time and also giving such a comprehensive presentation of the new set of profiles. And interesting, of course, is still this comparison between the two sectors, health and education. And we try to take advantage of this reflection also in our big efforts to, to improve the quality of cooperation in education as a global community. And you mentioned equity as well. So let me keep this as a red line of our discussion, not by chance today, and move into the next speaker, already announced, is Refat Sabah, the president of the chair of the Global Campaign for Education. Well, the Global Campaign for Education launches today the 1 Billion Voices campaign. It's a campaign that aims to elevate the voices from the billion learners who have been affected by the COVID pandemic and to secure an increase in public financing for education. So quite timely and quite relevant action. Well, my question is, what changes do you anticipate this campaign to achieve? And what role can individuals and organizations play to protect the right to education?
Thank you, Dr. Stefania, for asking me to take part in today's panel. As you say, together we are launching our new campaign, 1 Billion Voices. As is being discussed today, we must not only prevent rollbacks on education financing, but we must be pushing for more and better financing for education to make sure progress towards LGD4 gets back on track. The 1 Billion Voices campaign is a chance for everyone around the world to stand together to call for urgent action for education. In terms of what we are aiming to achieve, the overall policy objective of this campaign is to secure an increase in public financing of education to ensure inclusive, equitable, quality education and to promote long life learning opportunity for all. We have developed a call for action of policy recommendations, which will enable the improvement and increase in public financing of education for all. Different parts of the GCE movement and our partners will focus their lobbying and campaigning efforts on different policy areas. And we anticipate traction and action across all recommendations, which include increase state funding for education to 20% of public expenditure, increase their tax base in order to increase resources, working towards a maximum tax to GDP ratio of 20%, enable urgent debt cancellation for the least developed countries, and debt elevation for middle and upper middle income countries, ensure inclusive education system and institutions, provide free quality education for all, and the trends toward the privatization and commercialization of education, improve the quality of teaching through educate recruitment and continue teacher training, listen and respond to the voices of those affected people. Space must be allowed for the individual and civil society to speak up. Developed country must continue to work towards the goal of 0.7% overseas aid, with 20% of this spent on education, and increase their contribution to the goal, to the global partnership for education, and education cannot wait. An example for the target advocacy work aligned with this, a new debate cancellation campaign we are now launching in the Arab region in the few coming days, in the 30th of this month. We are also aiming to help achieve successful of the GBE replenishment through our campaigning efforts. We are expecting from the organization and the individual to join us in this campaign, and we are expecting the people to raise their voices. We want them to show all the material, including the films that we produce and contain all the policy recommendations that I mentioned. The people, they should really share their stories, how they have been affected by this pandemic. The civil society can really develop the tools for the local advocacy. We have to localize our advocacy in order to mobilize the people, to raise their voices, and to put the pressures in the government, for, especially to increase the domestic financing. Lastly, I think we have to reinforce the solidarity at the national, regional, international level. And as GCE, we are asking the people to join us in the coming Global Action Week, which will come in April, where we have to mobilize really millions of people in order to raise their voices. The education is the solution. The education is not the victims. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for the passion of and commitment of the movement you're building, and this ambitious action plan, which is about advocacy, but we heard also some concrete proposal related to financing mechanism which can improve the quality of the work we are doing. And right to education is very much at the core of the discussion as well. And this brings me to the next speaker, Yasmin Sharif, CEO of the Education Cannot Wait, the specialized dedicated global fund to education in emergencies. And today is an important day as well for Education Cannot Wait and all main actors of education in emergencies, as has been the Geneva Global Hub for Education in Emergencies has been launched a few hours ago. I had the privilege to attend this virtual meeting with Yasmin as well. So thanks for joining us. And how will this hub be a catalyst for joint action and greater advocacy and financing to education in emergencies?
Thank you very much, Stefania, and thank you very much also to Alice Albright from GPE for inviting Education Cannot Wait and me to this meeting and to commemorate International Education Day. I will reach that conclusion at the end of it. And let me lead it up to why we need the Geneva Hub. And thank you for the great contribution this morning, Stefania. At ECW, we have this principle that we go to the people in crisis. So I have just come back from missions to Lebanon and to Burkina Faso. We need to go into the crisis like a fireman, the house is on fire. We cannot stay away. There's COVID-19, we have to go to them for solidarity, but also to fully understand what the situation is on the ground. Now, in Lebanon, which was once a middle-income country, we now see, due to the explosion in August and due to them being the country in the world with the highest per capita refugees, Syrian and Palestinian refugees, moving towards a humanitarian crisis index, losing that stability. In Burkina Faso, we saw utter poverty and an utter discrimination of girls and direct targeting of schools. Though the political will is there with the governments, they don't have the resources. And I think Manos pointed out that when it comes to government cost sharing, this seldom works when you are in a conflict or a crisis country because of their extreme poverty and because of the occupation of a war. In Lebanon, 40% of the funding for the humanitarian response plan is funded, so 60% is underfunded. I went to Bekaa Valley speaking with Syrian refugees. Their education as a result of COVID-19 and lack of resources has completely stopped. Girls are sitting there without any access to education. The technology does not exist. We met with teachers, I met with parents. There is one family with one smartphone, and there are 6 children that are supposed to attend school. The teachers are working very hard, but with one smartphone, you cannot keep going a proper quality education for 6 children in a family. But parents also need the phone. We see a great breakdown in mental health, and we know that if MHPSS is not addressed, there can be no concentration, no learning, and the poverty also leads to malnutrition and undernourishment. UNRWA suffers severe funding cuts, and as a result, will have programs for children with disabilities cut. The Education Cannot Wait has now come in to save that program with an emergency investment that was released last week, so that children with disabilities can continue to learn. We are saving that program. We are also coming in with a multi-year program in Lebanon for 3 years to save them, to give them 3 years chance to catch up, and an emergency programs to recover from the explosion in August, where 200 schools in Beirut were destroyed. And we are now working together with UNESCO in investing in at least 40 schools. If we had more funding, we could cater to all 200 schools. Now, what do we do? And how does that link to the Geneva hub? First of all, we all have to work together on resource mobilization. And I'll come to that in detail. But we need to look at new donors. During the COVID-19 time, the world's billionaires have made a profit of $938 billion. $938 billion in profit. So we need to align their interests and their concerns for the children in crisis, furthest left behind, such as the countries that I recently visited, like in the Sahel or in the Middle East or elsewhere, to actually share those profits to ensure that they get a continuous quality education with an emphasis on the girls. The other thing we need to do, and that was discussed in the morning's discussion on the Global Hub from the Geneva Academy and the Geneva University, it's important for us to broaden our narrative. We can't limit ourselves to literacy and numeracy alone. We need, as Alice said, of course, and which ECW is doing as well, put a much stronger emphasis on girls' education. Mental health and psychosocial services are critically important. WASH, water and sanitation, climate change. We have to accept the realities, the abnormal realities of climate change and forced displacement, and connect the dots and realize that everything is connected holistically and focus on those left furthest behind. Finally, we all need to join forces. The World Bank and the GPE, which is one aspect, Then we have the United Nations, which is UNESCO, UNICEF, Education Cannot Wait, UNHR, WFP, the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General. We have to work with civil society who are doing amazing work on the ground, and I saw that firsthand. We have to work with the EU. The new EU Commissioner is increasing the development aid to 10%, and the humanitarian commissioner is standing by the previous agreement, and the UN member states and with AU and other regional organizations. Finally, education is, as we all agree, it is an investment in humanity, in the human mind, in the human soul, in the human heart. And this is what is needed to build back better from a crisis, from a conflict that has lasted for decades. So how do we get these billionaires of $933 billion to move and shift from maybe a will to power or government, to move from a shift of national interest to have an interest in all of humanity, and shows the will to humanity so that every child can enjoy the right to continuous quality education, and given the girls a chance to lead the world. That's all. Thank you. And that's what we will do at the Geneva Hub. That is part of our broader vision, working together to wake the world, take its responsibility.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yasmin, for your passion, commitment, and the clear mind you have presenting these points. Thanks for recalling Lebanon. We are proud, as you said, to work hand in hand with the international community. UNESCO leading this ambitious project of rehabilitation of schools after the blast in August last year. And thanks for recalling connecting the dots. You mentioned all the different dimensions of this effort, common effort we are doing to approach with a new, more effective kind of partnership, also building on the experience we are doing in this special, unprecedented situation in the international community of education. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you. And I'm now pleased to give the last word to Jaime Savedra, the Global Director of Education at the World Bank, a great partner as well, who sent us a video message as he couldn't join us live today. Well, the World Bank has estimated, as you maybe remember, the cost of learning losses over this period in the trillions, amounting to 10% of global GDP. And yet education is receiving minimal attention in stimulus packages, is about less than 1%. So I think from Jaime perspective, we'll hear which kind of opportunities we have to leverage this year. I mentioned before G7, G20, GP replenishment, and how the investment case for education be better made, and what are the way to channel and more efficiently. Listen to him.
We're living a massive and unprecedented global twin shock to education. Extended school closures like we have never seen before, and the worst economic crisis in the century. We have seen heroic efforts of remote learning in almost all countries in the world, but that will never replace presential learning. So learning losses are mounting rapidly, mainly in low and middle income countries where closures count now in the hundreds of school days, mainly among the poor and marginalized who do not have access to internet or to smartphone, mainly among girls who might not return to school after this shock. We're witnessing a huge reversal in learning gains and immense increases in inequality. We have now two immediate critical tasks. First, get back to learning now, using blended, semi-presential, or remote methods. We need to maintain the engagement of children and youth with school. And as soon as the health risks allow, we need urgently to get back to school. And second task, we need to use the window of opportunity that this pandemic opens not only to build back, but to build forward more effective, equitable, and resilient education systems. This is an opportunity to close the digital divide, to transform the way teachers are hired and supported, to center the teaching and learning process around the student, to support parents in their critical role to assure that learning continues from the school to home. But this costs money. Just note that in a low-income country, expenditures per child are a bit more than $70. In rich countries, that average is almost $10,000. Add 2 zeros to how much a poor country spends in education per child, and still you don't reach what a high-income country spends. I think there's space for solidarity. We're doing our share at the World Bank. These last 2 years, we will be reaching almost $11 billion in financing to education, but that's not sufficient. We're working closely with UNESCO and UNICEF on learning data, on remote learning, on supporting the return to school. We're working with GPE in financing the emergency, and that is great. Again, not sufficient. True, national governments everywhere will always bear the brunt of the financing of education. Their stimulus packages will have to be bigger, and they should include investing more in people. But the international community has to play a critical role, even recognizing that rich countries have also been hit by the crisis. The international community has reacted fast in 2020, but much more solidarity is needed in the form of even more financing to support education. Sometimes we say we need to protect education budgets, or we say we need to protect international aid to education. Well, protecting will not be enough. The crisis is huge, and more resources, domestic and international, are needed. The task is immense and urgent, but doable. We have to do it because we cannot lose a generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to our great friend Jaime Savedra. Protecting is not enough. I think you're right. And I think mentioning the importance and the scale of these efforts we are doing, I conclude that thanking all speakers for these strong messages on both domestic and international financing, and keeping in mind that the soul has not changed, GPE and in this community and partnership. And would just end to express UNESCO's current efforts to strengthen this cooperation, this global cooperation in education, so that together we are more effective in addressing the giant but not insurmountable challenges to education ahead. I now have the pleasure, as the last speaker, to give the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Tijani Mohamed Bande, Permanent Representative of Nigeria to the UN and former President of the UNGA. As you know, Nigeria spearheaded and promoted the resolution that established this International Day. And Ambassador Bande is a fervent advocate of education, being an educator himself. But first, a 1-minute video to launch the 1 Billion Voices campaign that you just heard about. I thank you very much.
Education is a basic human right. Yet COVID-19 has left an estimated 1.5 billion without access to learning. And many millions of children will never be able to return. COVID-19 has led to a seismic reversal of education progress, which will also have a devastating effect on many other sustainable development goals, such as progress towards gender equality, with a disproportionate amount of girls being forced to drop out of school due to the pandemic. But this can change. You can change this. There are solutions to ensure universal education. We believe these lie in the hands of governments. If we raise over 1 billion voices for education and stand side by side as a global movement, we can and will achieve lifelong learning for all. Join the 1 billion voices campaign, and together we can reverse the trend and ensure free lifelong learning for everyone.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Yes,
Welcome.
okay.
Hi.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Welcome. Thanks for
Thank you.
joining us.
Thank you. Yes. President of the General Assembly, Mr. Secretary General, Director General UNESCO, Moderator, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the Director General of UNESCO and her team for making this event a success and for providing vital services to safeguard the right of education in the midst of the unprecedented global challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic. My sincere condolences to those who have lost loved ones, and I wish those suffering from the disease a quick recovery. I thank those on the front lines combating this disease, thereby keeping our communities safe and healthy. I applaud our speakers, panelists, and moderators from around the world who have discussed one of the defining issues of our time, quality education. Excellencies, in 2018, Nigeria, alongside Norway, Ireland, and other partners, formed a core group that nurtured and facilitated the adoption of General Assembly Resolution 73/25, which, among other things, called on member states, organizations of the United Nations system, other international and regional organizations, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders to observe the 24th January of every year as the International Day of Education, and to mark the occasion in an appropriate manner. The first International Day of Education was accordingly observed on 24 January 2019 at the United Nations headquarters in New York. When we celebrated the second edition of the International Day of Education at a high-level event of the United Nations General Assembly on 24 January last year, little did we know that we would experience the biggest disruption to education in history. As highlighted by many distinguished speakers here today, the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in an unprecedented school closure. Over 1.6 billion students have experienced a disruption in education. In effect, 94% of the world's students have been impacted, with students in low and middle income countries being the most affected. For the most vulnerable children, including girls and children with disabilities and children in fragile contexts, return to school is not guaranteed. This will affect their literacy achievements. It will also threaten their analytical and critical thinking skills, thus affecting their capacity for tolerance and intercultural dialogue. The stakes for the well-being and health of our society's distinguished colleagues are that high. The pandemic is exacerbating pre-existing inequalities. Today, millions of students are unable to access the internet at home. Even in the most endowed countries, parents are struggling to balance work commitments and the needs of children learning remotely. Moreover, 2/3 of teachers are not equipped with the skills to deliver online learning. Excellencies, despite demonstrable progress around the world for decades in relation to education, at the onset of the pandemic, estimates showed that some 265 million children were out of school, and this figure was projected to fall to 20 million by 2030. More than half of the students who were enrolled in school were not meeting minimum proficiency standards in reading and mathematics. Over 130 million girls were out of school, and over 1 billion girls and young women lacked the skills they needed to succeed in a rapidly developing world. Excellencies, during the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly, which I had the honor to preside over, we chose quality education, SDG 4, as one of the overarching priorities of the session and ensured it was mainstream throughout the work of the General Assembly and beyond. Recognizing that quality education is important and the fact that no nation can develop past its educational capacity, we worked to ensure that member states partnered on teacher training, access to free and quality primary and secondary education, among others. In this regard, ladies and gentlemen, I'm grateful to member states who contributed by suggesting and undertaking, among other things, concrete projects to address some of the aforementioned issues. To mention a few, with the support of UNESCO and other stakeholders, we collaborated with India and Palau through the India UN Development Fund for the implementation of a school renovation project in Palau, helping facilitate the building of classrooms for hundreds of children in that country. As a result of engagement with the Hamid bin Khalifa University in Doha during my visit to Qatar, the university announced free scholarships to 50,000 refugees and displaced children who are unable to get the education they need and deserve. We partnered with the International Parliamentary Union and held its annual parliamentary hearing with a special focus on the importance of implementing Sustainable Development Goal 4 and ensuring that adequate financial resources are allocated to education, technical and vocational training throughout the national budgetary processes. These are practical demonstrations of partnerships and international collaboration that I will continue to encourage. Excellencies, in 2015, we adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and continued and strengthened our commitment to achieving equal access to quality education for all. We must ensure that we urgently tackle the disruptions the pandemic has already caused to education around the world. As we recover and rebuild from the COVID-19 pandemic, I call on governments and all stakeholders to mainstream education in their response to mitigate conflict, hunger, poverty, and instability, which weaken a student's ability to learn. We must adequately finance our efforts. I call on countries to meet the two benchmarks set by SDGs in 2015, calling for at least 4% of GDP and at least 15% of public expenditure to be allocated to education. I also call on donors to meet the United Nations target of 0.7% of gross national income to foreign aid and allocate 7% of that aid to primary and secondary education. This will help bridge the annual financial gap regarding education. In order to learn, students require a safe learning environment, free from bullying, as well as adequate sanitation facilities and clean running water, a safe path to school, electricity, and internet connectivity. It is therefore clear that we can only make gains on implementing SDG 4 if we approach it as a cross-cutting area which spans multiple portfolios. Of course, because I'm a teacher, I believe that in the truism that no educational system can rise above the quality of its teachers. We must do more to ensure that we have adequately qualified teachers. In this regard, due consideration should be paid to the importance of curricula. A strong curriculum taught by well-trained teachers is essential to ensuring a high level of learning which meets the needs of students and the needs of continually changing societies. I acknowledge that everyone needs to see a return on their investment, and that is why we need qualitative data to monitor SDG 4 and its associated targets. The education community has a robust monitoring tool in the Global Education Monitoring Report, and I urge all of you to engage with the publications housed under UNESCO. It is an important resource for us all. Excellencies, education is the great equalizer, and if we fail to invest in our people, we'll fail in ensuring that they live dignified, meaningful, and prosperous lives. As we begin the decade of action and deliberate to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, there can be no barriers to entry into education. Education is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and as such, it is our responsibility to guarantee that it is upheld in all contexts. We must guarantee, at a minimum, universal access to basic education for every child, everywhere. We cannot afford to forget about children and young people with disabilities, those who are often at risk of being left behind. We must ensure that facilities meet the needs of all children so that they can achieve their goals. We must encourage and equally enable girls to study and have careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. According to the World Bank, ensuring that girls complete at least 12 years of education would add 30 trillion to the global economy. Including girls in education is not just the right thing to do, it is also the smart thing to do. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I wish to remind that as we build back better, we have a moral obligation to guarantee that this pandemic does not widen existing educational gaps. The notion of leaving no one behind should start with education as the greatest investment for society and the most effective equalizer. This necessarily requires genuine and enduring partnerships across communities, regions, states, and other partnerships. I urge us all to give support to this endeavor. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Banda, for your passion, commitment, and recalling us at the end this moral obligation we share, for sure. It's a perfect concluding words of this incredible, inspiring International Day for Education. Let me thank once again all speakers, moderators, and a special thank to GPE for co-organizing with us this event. But please don't go, let's stay with us. And now we come to a much awaited moment of this International Day of Education. It has attracted more than 2,500 youth around the world. I'm speaking about imaginary conversations between a girl living in confinement and a little prince, the Petit Prince, a story writing contest around the world's most universal tale. I'm sure all of you know and hopefully already read this incredible, inspiring book. UNESCO enthusiastically welcomed this Learning Planet Festival initiative organized together with the Fondation de Saint-Exupéry pour la jeunesse and Labo des Histoires. Let's see the trailer and hear from UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay on the launch of this contest.
Il était une fois une petite fille.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl who had to stay at home and avoid any contact with her friends, her schoolmates, and her family. She was locked down and couldn't go out to the outside world. She had never imagined that some decades earlier, a plane pilot had gone through something similar. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's plane crashed in the desert, and he felt worse and more alone than a sailor marooned in the middle of the sea. Fortunately, a little prince happened to be passing by, and Saint-Exupéry recorded their conversation and opened our eyes on a lot of beautiful things. During quarantine, the little girl was visited in similar fashion by the little prince. They talked about the planet, about her life, her fears, and her hopes. It's up to you now to imagine what they talked about and tell us about that conversation. This year, we are celebrating the 120th anniversary of the birth of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the famous author of The Little Prince. What this little book tells us is the power of literature and imagination to cope with the unknown and learn how to read the world and discover it with new eyes. And it's this power that UNESCO defends with its action to ensure the culture and education are priorities for all pupils can also become little princes of imagination. Thank you very much to our DG for that message.
Recall a bit the work we've done with Learning Planet initiative. The Little Prince has found place in the lives and hearts of children and adults around the world for 75 years now. During the confinement, let me say that I found consolation and light in rereading once again this incredible, inspiring story. And I think we have to tame our word, approvisoire notre monde. And we can only do this from the heart perspective. Our planet is threatened. We know we must care for it, as this little inspiring book says. Taking care, we said many times in our meetings, is a bit the words we need in this century, and the words we have to put at the core of education. I wish to thank our UNESCO-associated school network for actively supporting this initiative and involving our schools in the project. I extend as well a very warm welcome to all the youth contributors and educators today who stood by their side to encourage them in their creative process. But now I have the pleasure and honor to pass the floor to Mr. Olivier Daguet, Secretary General of the Fondation Antoine de Saint-Exupéry and the great-grandnephew of the author. Monsieur
Yes.
Olivier, je vous donne la parole.
Merci beaucoup.
You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much, AG. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olivier Daguet. I am great nephew of the author of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry as Delegate General of the Saint-Exupéry Foundation. This foundation for young people has been working in 25 countries, helping young people to become fully fledged citizens of our society and combat exclusion and marginalization. This is an essential factor in the integration, culture and education. And this means learning to read and write, which are the keys to the future. This is why the competitions and writing workshops are so important for us and for you too, I'm sure. Obviously, the influence of The Little Prince, which is the religious book that's being translated most of the world with 430 languages, is something that stimulates the imagination of young people and adults, for whom Little Prince is a universal ambassador for equality and inclusion. So we have this competition in 6 languages, but over and above that, of course, the Little Prince speaks the universal language, and it's thanks to the support of UNESCO's DG, Mrs. Audrey Azoulay, thank you very much, and Stefania Giannini, who's ADG for Education. It's thanks to them that we have been able to collect all these different essays, but thank you also to François Tadier for Learning Planet and others for their logistics support. Thank you to them for their generosity and long-standing commitment side by side with our organization for many years. We also express our sincere gratitude to the members of the jury who have spent their precious time on assessing the efforts of these young writers. In particular, we send out a Saint-Exupéry hi to everybody, Angel Yesser, and all the other people, and of course the sponsor of our organization, Claudie Ignoret. I am looking forward to see the list of finalists and the winners, and I would like to congratulate them as of now on behalf of the Antoine de Saint-Exupéry Foundation Minister. I went online to look at all the texts that sent in. I would like to congratulate and thank all of those, all the boys and girls who took part and sent in their stories. And now let's go through together who are the winners of this competition.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Daguet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daguet. It's a delight for us to be working on this wonderful initiative for all of you. And thank you for being with us. It's also my pleasure to give the floor to François Tadei, who is the person behind all this. He's the Chief Exploration Officer of CRI, a member of the National Jury. I would like to thank Francois and his people for all the energy they've put into this, their vision, their commitment from the very beginning of this joint project to show that education is a source of inspiration for all young people. François Tari. Thank you very much, Stefania. I think this is a wonderful moment for us to be here, showing that we can work together. CRI and UNESCO have jointly launched this project because we've managed to organize hundreds of events to celebrate the International Day of Education. And one of the events, the most symbolic for us, is the ability to give young people a voice. We were with some wonderful young people yesterday who are trying to change the way they learn so that they can take control of themselves and the planet. And this is a great pleasure. And it's even greater pleasure today because we're going to be able to celebrate these 2,500 young people who took time out to try to write something that they had in their hearts. This idea of a conversation, as Auredan said, between the little prince and the little girl. And we want to thank all the organizations that have helped so much, the UNESCO schools and all the others that worked with and supported pupils, their parents as well, so that they could write down what they had in their hearts during this very special time, because I think we need to get through this terrible time and start dreaming again. And dreaming with the Little Prince is perhaps easier because he's a universal character, as was well said by the person who represents Saint-Exupéry's ideas and words, his descendant. We need this time, this possibility to think and dream about other things. So as a member of the jury, I think I can say that it was a great inspiration and a difficult task as well, because all the stories sent in were excellent, and Claudia Nuri and all the others. We tried to work together on this because we were so excited by all of the stories that we found it hard to make up our minds. And so we had to agree nonetheless. And this was made possible because we were able to ask ourselves in our hearts what we were most touched by. And there were 60 finalists who had been shortlisted, and we just needed to work on 10 because there were 6 times 10, 60. So one for each language of UNESCO was selected. And these were very inspiring stories. We wanted to be young people under 25, but there was no minimum age. And the most amazing thing is that the youngest participant was 4. So I was absolutely amazed. She's already a young citizen of the world living in Japan, but writing in English. And this was very impressive. All the participants for me are winners because they won the right to dream and find a way through this difficult year by writing inspiring stories. And I think they all managed to do that. For me, they're all winners, and they will therefore get a badge and a poster thanking them for what they've done in the languages in which they took part. And I think that it's not just them that have won, but all the readers will be winners too, because we will be together organizing an online exhibition, and we'll invite them to write, and as Saint-Exupéry would have done, to draw, to illustrate their stories. And all of this will be posted on a website that we will work on together, Lowly Pand. It is wonderful. And as I say, this was an inspiration for me, these stories, as I was inspired by Saint-Exupéry. And, you know, there are lots of quotes from the story. Let me try to pick out a few that I think are most poignant. Stephanie talked about taming the world. Well, for Saint-Exupéry, the Little Prince, taming means creating links. And that's a way of linking with yourself, linking yourself to others and to the planet and to our environment. And I think this is absolutely vital And we need it more than ever today to be able to be connected to ourselves and others. Next quote from Little Prince would be, the fox says, you can only see properly with your heart. And I think this means we need to open our hearts and ask ourselves what we feel. What are our deepest feelings when you feel vulnerable or when you have to cope with unprecedented problems? And I think this calls on us, once we've opened up our hearts, to take better care of ourselves, others on the planet, because when you know you're vulnerable, when you know the community is vulnerable and the environment is vulnerable, we can do nothing other than commit to others on the planet. As Saint-Exupéry did, he fought the barbers. We have to fight the virus, but we need to organize this combat together. And last but not least, it doesn't come from Petit Prince, but it's Saint-Exupéry. He says, as far as the future is concerned, it's not about planning it, it's about making it possible. And I think we have to make possible a much brighter future than some doom or prophets of doom are saying it's going to happen. So we need to work together on getting through these difficult times, imagine a different future, perhaps a dream together and get together in order to turn our dreams into reality. As John Lennon said, maybe I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And as others have said, dreams come when you can share them and together take our dreams forward into reality. Thank you for your attention, and thank you once again for UNESCO and the Saint-Exupéry Foundation and all those who've written these wonderful stories so that together we can celebrate the Little Prince and open up the imagination of young people. Thank you very much, Francois. You talked about building links, making the future possible, and dreaming. I think those are the key messages of this International Education Day. So it's now a privilege to have online a member of the international jury who evaluated these stories and had to pick a winner from these over 1,000 young writers. We have Professor Su Jun that I can now see on screen, connected in from China, doubtless very late in the day over there. Thank you for being with us. So I will ask you to take us through the 60 finalists. In the 6 languages, we have 10 finalists each. Over to you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I am Xu Jing, a professor and translator at the Zhejiang University in China. It's a great honor for me to be able to announce on behalf of the jury, the international jury, the 60 finalists who are, as you can see here, in English, 10 finalists. For Arabic, also 10 finalists. There you can see their name, family name, age and country. And for Chinese, we have also 10 finalists. There they are. For Spanish too. You can see the names on the screen. And for French now. We have the 10 French language finalists. And now Russian. So you can see in every case that their given name, family name, age, and country of origin. So if I may, I would like to now, dear friends, ask you to warmly congratulate the 60 finalists, and with them, all of those who took part in the writing competition Conversation with Little Prince. So I would also invite you to express our thanks to all of those who supported the activity co-organized by UNESCO, the Antoine de Saint-Exupéry Foundation for Young People, the Labo des Histoires, and the CRI. On this solemn occasion, I would like to stress the huge importance of this activity, in particular in such difficult times for all of us, for all of mankind. I would say this competition contributes to cultivating an open-mindedness among young people. Through this activity, young people have been encouraged to open up to each other, to learn from each other and get to know each other much better. Secondly, this competition contributes to enhancing the imagination of young people and seeks to broaden their horizons and help them to discover other cultures. I am extremely and deeply touched by the level of creativity and imagination of the young people who took part in this. They addressed a wide range of different topics and shared with them their ideas about life, existence, their dreams, or the future. Thirdly, this competition has contributed to planting seeds of dialogue and exchange among members of the younger generation. At this particular time, we have a special need for this spirit of dialogue. Conversation with Little Prince is a way of reaching all children rather than teaching the values of respect of others and development of cultural diversity and the fostering of the culture of peace. And if I may, I would like to offer all of you this rose of love that the Little Prince brought from his planet. Once again, warmest congratulations and sincerest thanks to everyone. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you very much for all those parts of your message.
On this last slide, the 6 laureates of this international storytelling contest. I know they are all connected today, and let me just quickly read out their names. Serena Kadoum from Lebanon for Arabic. Shiwan Jin from China. I hope my pronunciation was almost right. Klaudia Makowska from Poland for English. Manel Fenouche from Algeria for French. Vyacheslav Shpakov from the Russian Federation for Russian. Vanessa Gabriela Cabrera Cardenas from Ecuador for Spanish. We are going to hear from some of them in this short video. Please.
Hello， 大家好，我的名字叫金熙媛，来自中国江苏省南京市。
La niña escuchó una risa, buscó de dónde provenía, descubriendo que era del cielo. La dulce risa del principito iluminó aquella noche el cielo estrellado que la niña observaba.
The Little Prince. You are you that bloomed with joy. I came to help you as a distant boy. I fear you're lost and all alone, and your dreams are torn and thrown. I see you cling to yesterday and think tomorrow has no way. You can tell me what's bothering you, for who you are is your biggest value. The girl. I'm a girl that dreamed with wonder, but I fear my life will be no younger. With a mind that once went beyond imagination, I have lost reason for determination. Here at a house which was my home, my family's sanity is now gone. This feeling is said to be spreading, and to me, it started heading. Finally got to me somehow, and to insanity I started to bow. The cage which trapped me keeps growing like a tree. Its branches don't let me see, but I try to escape just to be free. Where do I go now? In this ocean of storms, how can I be found? If only yesterday was today, maybe everything would be okay.
我写的这个故事讲述了小王子在地球医院里寻找爱的玫瑰的故事。我希望这个故事能给大家带来更多的动力。
Muchas gracias por escuchar mi historia. Quiero mandarles un fuerte saludo a todos y estoy muy feliz de poder haber participado y ser ganadora de este hermoso y gran concurso.
谢谢大家，拜拜。
Congratulations, really, to all of you and the finalists. The jury had a very tough job, I suppose. It's really impressive. It's really touching, this performance. It's not simply sharing ideas, but also, performing their and expressing their own feeling, what they have in the bottom of the heart, as you said. Well, your stories will be posted in a virtual exhibition, and UNESCO will explore how to publish them in this important year that also marks our organization's 75th anniversary. As you know, maybe building peace is our mission through education, culture, sciences, and international understanding. Our world has never been more connected than now, more interdependent. This crisis definitely highlighted the importance of this interconnection, the fragility we have in this, but also the importance and the strength of international solidarity. Créer des liaisons, des liens. Each of us carries the responsibility then and the potential to make it a more just, safe, and peaceful place. This starts from an aspiration deep within ourselves and flourishes in contact with all, that gives confidence and empowers you to act with this solidarity. I thank you very much once again to our wonderful partners, and may the little prince continue to make us dream and create an open world of friendship and caring. And the last big thanks goes to our interpreters who made this event possible at the same time of the executive board at UNESCO. Thank you, all of you, very much. And bye.